Well, good morning. I'm Ken Biberaj, and welcome to Coffee with Ken, a thought leadership series at the nexus of business and politics. In the news today, Vladimir Putin continues to court China, while President Biden spent the week meeting with NATO allies and visiting the Ukraine. Before we get started, I want to thank JBG Smith, our host today. We're here at National Landing at their Experience Center, home of Amazon's HQ2, Virginia Tech's Innovation Center, and we're thrilled by their partnership and welcoming us today. So big thanks to JBG. Now, we've wanted to team up with JBG for a while, but we were really trying to focus on who would be a good guest to have. And really, there is no one better than Carlos Del Toro, the 78th Secretary of the Navy, to host here today.
Thank you. Ken, are you going to say that to your next guest?
Of course not, Mr. Secretary. As long as you don't start Coffee with Carlos at the Pentagon.
That's right.
We can have a détente here, and we can be respectful of,
branding issue.
Of what we do. Well, look, in all seriousness, Mr. Secretary, it's great to have you. Let's start with the big balloon in the room. I think the Navy was involved in the retrieval of the balloon, the Chinese spy balloon over the shores of South Carolina. I'm not sure you could talk about what contents were there, but more broadly, would love your perspective on China, their rapid investment in their Navy, their growth, and the broader threats that you see from China.
Sure, and let me just take a few moments first to thank you, Ken, for hosting me here today with Coffee with Ken. It's really great to be back. When I was last here, I was CEO of a small company. I've now assumed responsibilities for a slightly larger organization, you might say. And and as Secretary of the Navy, for those that may not know, my Title 10 authorities are about manning, equipping, training, resourcing, acquiring all the systems that both the Navy and the Marine Corps use to fulfill our mission. And our mission in the Department of the Navy is to provide combat-ready forces to our combatant commanders. And as such, that's what I focus most of my attention on, gaining the necessary resources from Congress and putting those resources to the best use of the American taxpayer to get the most return on investment. And obviously, we're facing many, many threats as a nation, as a Navy. In the Department of the Navy, I have three major priorities that I've been focused on. It's strengthening our maritime dominance. It's creating a culture of warfighting excellence where everybody treats each other with dignity and respect to build the necessary trust that's needed in the Department of the Navy actually to build those warfighters as we need them to be. And then finally, strengthening our relationships with our partners and our allies around the world, but also with industry. Because often when people ask me what's the key ingredient to success, I often say that it's teamwork. It's about all of us working together in this common mission, and industry plays an important role there as well. So with regards to your first question, obviously our national defense strategy has highlighted China as our pacing threat. I wake up every day thinking about the threats that are posed by both China and Russia and all our adversaries. In this last case, obviously, with the balloon, I think that this was handled very maturely. I was very proud of our president to effect the order to take the balloon down. I think we took the balloon down exactly where we needed to take the balloon down, on the East Coast, in our territorial waters, in order to be able to recover most of the balloon and the equipment that came along with the balloon. And although I can't speak specifics about what we actually recovered, I'm very proud of our Navy divers and our EOD divers, for example, that went in and actually captured most of the equipment that needed to be captured.
Nice. And tell us a little bit about the advancement that you've seen from China with their buildup militarily and how that compares to your priorities.
Absolutely. It's ironic that if you look back to 1979, for example, or just prior to 1979, we were providing arms to China and technology to China in a significant way. How the world has changed since then, how China has changed since then, moving, towards obviously a system where they ignore the international norms of behavior. And it's important for us to deter them from trying to do that. It's important enough to deter them from trying to take Taiwan militarily. We believe in the one China policy. We have to abide by it. It's worked well throughout the decades. But we also need to make it clear that advance on Taiwan militarily is something that would not benefit China. It would not benefit anyone around the world. Our global economies are tied together. The more that we could freely and peacefully trade with each other across the world, it rises, the benefits to all people all around the globe, and that's what we need to strive for.
Yeah. The timing of the conversation is pretty spot on as it relates to the Ukraine. I believe tomorrow is the one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. Talk a little bit about Russia as a threat and maybe the Navy's involvement in
Sure.
supporting the Ukraine?
Well, obviously, what President Putin has done in Ukraine is just simply unforgivable. And we stand behind the Ukrainian government. We stand behind the Ukrainian people. They've demonstrated tremendous courage and resolve in fighting the Russians on the battlefield. And our president, our Secretary of Defense, our entire Department of Defense, and all our allies around the world, NATO and non-NATO countries as well too, have come to support Ukraine, and we will continue to do that for as long as necessary in order to protect Ukraine and keep it from being invaded. The violation of human rights in Ukraine has been really significant. And of course, the Department of the Navy has played a role. I can't go into specifics with regards to the role that we do play, but in supporting the Ukrainians, especially when it comes to their defenses at sea, for example, in the Black Sea and elsewhere. We provided equipment to them as well, too, along with many of the other services. And it's a collective effort. We have to do everything we can to protect democracy and freedom in the Ukraine and stand with the Ukrainian people.
So as it relates a little bit to your personal biography, you were in the Navy, you were a commander, and I think 9/11 was a significant moment for you personally and professionally. Talk a little bit about your history being in the Navy.
Sure.
And then what that was like versus what it's like today, the advancements of the Navy, innovation, threats, modernization.
Of course, there's a lot to answer there in that question, but I'll do my best.
You have this unique perspective where now you're at,
I was born in Cuba. I came here to this country as an infant with my parents and my grandmother, and I was very thankful, obviously, for the freedom and the democracy that it afforded my family. And as I grew up and went through public schools in New York City, I wanted to serve. I wanted to give back to my country. I also had an affinity for engineering. And so Annapolis became the perfect venue for me to try to apply to. I applied, got accepted. And that launched a 22-year career in the Navy in which I got to do some very amazing things. And, and we're struggling a bit recruiting these days, but I will tell you that, service in the military, service in the Department of the Navy and Marine Corps is something that transformed my life. I grew up dirt poor in Hell's Kitchen. I'm not sure I would have been even able to afford to go to college. And it's because of the Department of the Navy. It afforded me the opportunity to get an undergraduate degree, 3 master's degree, and just lead a magnificent 22-year career in the Navy where I became, commanding officer of a brand new ship that I built over 3 years. These are experiences that, are hard to sort of assimilate in other places, even in the private sector. So very thankful for my naval service, obviously. Then I went into the private sector for 17 years and learned a lot of lessons in the private sector. Started a small company with my wife, Betty, and we grew up to about 120 people. And it was an extraordinary experience that in many ways also advantages me, even more so sometimes than my Navy experience, because I really am running a huge enterprise of nearly 1 million people, $230 billion. Perhaps it might grow after March 9th. We'll see when the president releases the budget. But it's both those lessons in the Navy and the private sector that help me every day to be an effective Secretary of the Navy and do what's right by our sailors and our Marines. Now, with regards to the second part of your question, the Navy's transformed a lot since I came into the Navy, obviously. One of the things I'm most proud of, actually, is the relationships that we have with our partners and allies across the country. We're constantly trying to be more interoperable and interexchangeable. So we work very closely together in the Pacific and Fifth Fleet, everywhere, with our partners and allies, and there's plenty of examples that I could point towards where we're really building stronger relationships. In many ways, it's what differentiates us from the Chinese and the Russians, because we really do have partners and allies that are true alliances, unlike the Chinese and the Russians and others that don't have those tight relationships, So.
Well, one of the things that everybody in the private sector has to deal with, and you had to deal with previously in your career, and one of the reasons people are attracted, like Amazon was, to Northern Virginia and the DC area, is the hunt for talent.
Right.
And you talked a little bit about some of the challenges you face today. Talk about that. Like, how do you build the future fighting force for the Navy? What are your recruitment efforts? How have those evolved? What do you think you should be doing to attract the best and the brightest?
Absolutely. Well, whether it's in the private sector or it's in the government, the most important thing you can do in your own company and your own organization is retain the people that you have. And that's part of taking care of your people, right? And so I'm very proud of the efforts that the President, the Secretary of Defense, and myself and others have made to take care of our people. And so we're doing that. We've actually given the largest pay increase that we have in 20 years. We're looking at Bachelor Assistance Subsistence, BAS. We're looking at BAH as well too, which has to do with the housing allowances that enlisted folks get. We're taking care of our officers. We're providing really significant re-enlistment bonuses, for example, and also enlistment bonuses as well, up to $75,000, $100,000 in some cases. So it's a really exciting time to actually come into the Department of the Navy, into the Navy and the Marine Corps, and also be able to serve your country and learn the skill sets that are so important to later on as well transition into the private sector and continue to make a contribution in your life. But we want you to stay for at least 30 years. So.
Talk a little bit about private sector engagement and how important that is, right? We're here in Northern Virginia.
Yeah.
You know the big names, the Lockheeds and Northrops and all this stuff, right? But in your personal experience doing government contracting, how do you think about diversifying access to contracts from the Navy? How do you help new startups, innovation, tech? I mean, there seems to be a moment right now, and we've had a few folks from some aerospace defense companies now start winning contracts. How important is that to diversify and expand?
Yeah, and I've got a lot of experience having done that myself. And, in my 18 months as secretary, I probably invested more time into building relationships with the private sector than any previous secretary of the Navy in a long time. And it's important. It's important because we have to be combat ready. In order to be combat ready, it takes a team. And the industrial base is incredibly important to that. Whether it's building ships, submarines, aircraft for the Navy or Marines, we need everybody together working together. We also need to expand the marketplace. There's a lot of opportunities working with the Department of Defense and working with the government. It's sometimes harder because you got to get through the bureaucracy at first, and we're trying to expand the information that we make available to especially small businesses to give them the confidence that they can do it. It may take a little bit of extra time, but the rewards are enormous on the back end of it, obviously. And we need to expand the marketplace so that we can increase competition for the government as well, too, because by increasing competition, we also keep our prices lower. And that's an important return on the American taxpayers' dollars. So it's all these things working together. But I have actually committed to meeting our small business goals, for example. And it's important for small businesses to work with medium-sized businesses and work with larger businesses, all as one team, to be able to respond to the RFPs that we put out on the street. But don't be intimidated by the rules and the regulations. If you just kind of read through the dotted lines and take the time to actually prepare yourself to do business with the government, it can be very successful and very rewarding. And I really encourage small business entrepreneurs to take a look at doing business with the Department of the Navy in particular.
Yeah. And I mean, he's willing to have coffee. I mean,
there you go.
Send out an invite. Part of that private sector engagement is also shipbuilding. And you built a ship. And what is needed today because of this resurgence in manufacturing, right? So there's always kind of unintended consequences. Right now, there's this moment with the Inflation Reduction Act and CHIPS Act. Manufacturing in America is increasing.
It is.
And the demand to have a skilled workforce and modernize even shipyards, how much of that are you thinking about? How much pressure do you see on the horizon? How do you engage the private sector to spend their resources and talent to build what the Navy needs versus building the next semiconductor factory?
So it takes a team to be effective, right? And we've increased communications with companies, small, medium, and large, to understand the challenges that they're facing. And across the entire spectrum, small, medium, and large, the biggest challenge is the labor force. And so, although it's not directly in my swim lane, I've talked a lot about how we need to increase legal immigration in this country, how we need to increase actually work visa programs, legal work visa programs from other countries so that we can get the skilled labor that we have. Look, the good news is that we have a very thriving economy. Despite the challenge of inflation, and now it appears to be coming down based on all the decisions that the president and others in government have actually made, which are paying dividends now. But inflation has had a negative impact on the economy overall. It's now getting better. But nevertheless, unemployment is still under 4%, which is a good thing. But it also makes it hard to find labor. And historically, we've actually brought labor in from other countries before, and we've allowed legal immigration in this country. And if we don't expand that, it's going to start really hurting our economy. And we see it in shipbuilding, we see it in other places. And the good news is that we're hiring, we're offering higher salaries and throughout different industries, but that's also in competition with shipbuilding and other things. So we got to keep trying to bring in more labor to the country to, expand our economy.
So as you deal with partners, especially partners in government, like Congress, sometimes priorities maybe don't always align, right? You may have members of Congress that want to invest and keep a certain piece of equipment. Or
there are a lot of members of Congress with their own opinions about what to do.
So how surprised maybe have you been over the last 18 months with some of these priorities that maybe don't align with exactly where you think you should be investing in whether it's ships, aircraft, material, shipyards that maybe shouldn't be there, but jobs are there, right? Like, how do you juggle the politics of it all?
You know, perhaps one of the greatest things in having been born in and out of the country and then coming to this country is you realize how great this country really is. And our founding fathers built this nation basically on a system, very complicated, difficult, sometimes frustrating system of checks and balances, but it really is a great system. So you have this judiciary, you have an executive department of which I'm part of, and then you have a legislative branch. And we all have our purpose in the Constitution. We all have to work together. You know, I was very proud that I was confirmed 100-0 in the Senate, for example. That just doesn't necessarily always happen. But it's the type of bipartisan spirit that's necessary to be able to respect different views in Congress. And there are many views in Congress. There's 100 different views in the Senate, and there's many views in the House as well, too. And when I visit Capitol Hill, and I do a lot because it's an important relationship, they represent the American people and the different views that the American people have in every congressional district and every state. And it's important for me to respect that and understand that and work with members of Congress to get to the right place. My job is to inform them. Inform them about the needs of our sailors, of our Marines, of the Department of the Navy, on which capabilities are going to be most effective for being able to meet our warfighting challenges, and to have that engagement and conversation with them, and come to a compromise sometimes in terms of what we can actually do together as part of the authorization acts and as part of the appropriation bills that are so critical to our national security. But I do hope that we continue this bipartisan spirit of working together, because it's important for our Congress and our nation to pass our authorization bills and our appropriation bills on time, so that we can meet the needs that we have to face.
You're a student of history. The Navy goes back to the founding fathers.
It does.
Talk a little bit about how significant the Navy has been in our maritime history and why we are a maritime nation, which is what we titled today's.
Yeah, no, it's very significant. We are a maritime nation, and the Navy has been responsible for our economic success since the beginning of the founding of our country. And all true great nations have strong navies to essentially keep the sea lanes of communications open, to protect the trade that goes on around the globe. That's what our Navy and our Marine Corps does, whether it's in the Pacific, the Atlantic, in the Middle East, everywhere. We protect American trade and international trade all around the world, so that all nations can benefit, and particularly the U.S. economy can benefit from our service. So yes, that Amazon package that comes to your doorstep, sometimes a little bit too often than not, gets to that doorstep. Perhaps the last leg came by land, but the first step of that package often comes because the Navy protects the sea lanes of communication. And it's important to continue to do that.
And even with cables and social
and
media.
cables as well, too. So protection of the seabed. Every day you have over $1 trillion in transactions. So you getting online and getting on Facebook or Twitter or whatever it is that you do, and all the financial transactions that go on every single day are also protected because the Navy protects the oceans and the seas and the territorial waters where those cables, are found.
Yeah. Storytelling is an important job for any leader. Talk a little bit how important it is for the Navy, right? And you already had Top Gun Maverick come out over the summer. I mean, I'm not sure what more you need, but I think you were in Hollywood last week meeting with producers and writers.
I was.
Right? So I mean, the job is glamorous. We all know that. But tell us a little bit about storytelling and why things like that are important.
No, it's more than the glamour. It's actually getting the story about what these amazing sailors and Marines are all about. Most of these young men and women, your young men and women, your sons, your granddaughters, your grandchildren, they swear an oath of office to our country. They're willing to give their lives to our country. We have a responsibility to always treat them as professionals with dignity and respect. But they really are great Americans, even at the age of 18, 19, 20 years of age. And most are under the age of 25, right? So we have to tell their stories. There's sometimes negative stories out there, but there's hundreds of thousands of more positive stories about how the Department of the Navy, how the Navy and Marine Corps has transformed these young men and women women into adults, and we've trained them and we've given them experiences that are extraordinary, and how they protect our national security. So that's why I went to Hollywood. I met with 75 or so directors, actors, a Hollywood caucus, the Navy caucus, of anybody who cares about our Department of the Navy and Marine Corps. And we talked about how best we can tell these American stories that are so important, with so many different perspectives and backgrounds and everything. And they want to help. They really want to help. And I think, Top Gun Maverick is a perfect example of that. The pilots that flew in Top Gun Maverick, now I shouldn't reveal too many secrets.
It's a safe space. No.
But since I didn't sign any contract with anybody, I guess I could. But, those were flown by real Navy pilots, And so it's representative of what they're all about. How many of you saw the Super Bowl?
No.
Huh? Did you see the all-female team of pilots flying on the Super Bowl? That's what our Navy is all about. And, my bumper sticker says, we need tough women and to serve in both the Navy and the Marine Corps. So if you want to join up, I'll take your names today and I'll sign you up this afternoon.
This is actually a recruitment event.
Okay.
The fine print. But before we got started, we were chatting a little bit with the audience about climate change.
Yes.
Not something that comes to mind immediately as being a priority for someone in your role today as you think about protecting the nation and countries around the world. But how are you focused on climate change? How are you implementing some of the president's priorities? What can we expect from the Navy?
The President of the United States, President Biden, has made it perfectly clear, and we're all in agreement, Secretary of Defense, myself, everyone, that climate change is our existential threat to all humanity. And every organization has to do their part. So we're doing our part as well, too. In the Marine Corps, for example, I'm very proud of the fact that in Albany, Georgia, we finally just got to basically, we're off the grid. We're off the electric grid in Albany, Georgia, and we're providing electricity to the local community, right? And there's many other investments that we're making in science and technology. And there's an opportunity for small business entrepreneurs and medium-sized business entrepreneurs to work with us on operational energy, on ways to more effectively build, find the right biofuels, for example, that we can put in our aircraft, and we can put in our ships, or come up with new design for ships, for example, that could save energy, such as a stern flap on one of our Arleigh Burke destroyers, or how to best operate our ships at sea, so that, and we try to learn a lot from the cruise line industry, for example, because they're really fuel efficient and energy efficient as well too. So we're constantly, striving to seek new ideas in science and technology to make those investments in our Department of the Navy. It's also important for us to work together with our allies and partners, because when you look at countries, and whether it be in the Caribbean or Oceania, Blue Pacific, or Central and South America, climate's impacting everything from, the different migrating patterns of fish, for example, the Arctic. So all of these issues the Department of the Navy is involved in to try to come up with solutions that make sense. But for many small nations, it is their most existential threat, and especially in the Pacific and the Caribbean and the island nations.
Let's talk about technological advancement. It takes time to build ships, to be prepared, to plan for the future. But innovation and technology seems to be advancing so quickly. How do you see prioritizing innovation, unmanned aircraft, AI, all of these things that you're seeing on a daily basis? How do you stay ahead of the curve when it takes just
It's incredibly important, whether it's a submarine or aircraft, an aircraft carrier, marine investments. We're making major investments in innovation. The Marine Corps just stood up a marine innovation unit, Newburgh, New York, for example, last year. This year, I announced that we're standing up a Naval Innovation Center at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. And it's for this very purpose, to try to work with the tech industry, both in the East Coast and the West Coast and everywhere across the country, through NavalX and Office for Naval Research. Bring all those elements together, basically, so that we can try to capture the most innovative technology that's out there and work with Silicon Valley and tech entrepreneurs as one team to try to bring technology to the warfighter in the quickest way possible.
And how do you focus on Silicon Valley for a moment? I feel like there were decades where folks in Silicon Valley were focused on Facebook and Google, et cetera.
Right.
And they kind of shied away from the defense defense and aerospace industries, but that seems to be changing. How are you taking advantage of and getting that talent?
Well, it's changing, and it's like you said earlier, the fastest, most advanced innovations are coming from the private sector.
Yeah.
When you take a look at, during the Obama administration, for example, when the nation made the decision to move away from manned space flight at one moment in time and shift it to the private sector, look how we've transformed since then. Now we have SpaceX. Everything's happening in the private sector to a large extent, working with the government, right? That's the way it should be, right? Private sector has the most capital, have a lot of the talent, and they can invest in the type of technologies and advancements that we need in the government. And so it takes that teamwork working together to insert that technology and sustain it into our acquisition programs throughout the Department of Defense. And I know that that's not always easy to do, but that's why we've stood up organizations like Naval X, for example, and here in Crystal City, there'll be a new one standing up. We have them around the country and around the globe. Actually, we have one in England. We're looking at opening one up in India as well, too, for small business and medium-sized businesses to come in and work with us and share their ideas and their thoughts so that we can get them into our SBIR programs and other acquisition programs.
Education's critical.
Let me just say one other thing. As a small business entrepreneur, though, you've got to be persistent. You've got to learn how to persevere. Things just don't happen overnight. Just because you think you have a great idea, you got to understand how the system works. So spend time investing in how our system works so that you could actually insert yourself into that system. And, you could shake it up, from time to time as well, too, and you should shake it up from time to time. But you got to learn the basics of how it works, and then the rewards will follow if you actually take the time, investment, and persistence, and it pays off. It really does. I know from personal experience.
Talk about partnerships with educational institutions, right?
Yes.
Virginia Tech's going to be locating here. We have folks from Georgia Tech Research Institute here. Mason's doing a lot. How proactive do you have to be reaching out to educational institutions and pushing them to be resources for government?
It's very, very exciting. And we work with many of the major educational institutions across the country, whether it be Hopkins, but also extending more out to the community colleges and the universities like Virginia Tech. We're very excited about the Virginia Tech campus coming here. I had the privilege of serving on the Governor's Council on Higher Education, so I became very familiar when I was in the private sector in my volunteer capacity with all of the public universities in Virginia and the advantages that they bring. That's the type of talent that we need in our workforce. We want to recruit those folks into the Navy and Marine Corps first, but if not, we're happy that they're working in the tech industry side by side with us as contractors, because that's the type of talent that we need. Now, what we in the government have to do, and the Department of the Navy have to do, which I've been trying to work with OPM, is facilitate that young talent being able to come on board to the contract workforce in an easier manner. So sometimes, for example, you might have an entry-level person on a contract that's sort of facing the challenge of needing 2 years of experience to come in at the entry level. Well, I say why? They're a young, bright junior engineer coming out of Virginia Tech. Believe me, they know how to spell AI better than most of us. And we need to capture that talent very, very early on.
Yeah. As a closing question before we wrap up, what is your ask of people watching today and listening? We have a lot of folks from the private sector.
Absolutely.
Sometimes government seems out of reach, right? Like, you're doing your thing and folks are doing their thing, but they can help and they can be a resource and they can support your initiatives.
My biggest ask for you is first to thank you. Thank the American people for the investment that you make in our military, in our Department of the Navy, in our Navy, in our Marine Corps. Please support your troops. These are your children. These are your grandchildren. My job is to care for them, and I take that responsibility very seriously. But support them in every possible way. We shouldn't allow any bashing of any members that serve in uniform, admirals, generals, enlisted across the board. For the past 4 or 5 years, have been some of that going on. That's just intolerable. We've never had that throughout our nation's history, for God's sakes. Either in Republican administrations or Democratic administrations, we got to support our troops. And I assure you that your president and your Secretary of Defense and myself are taking care of our people, and we're looking at all programs across the board to be able to take care of those brave men and women who join our services every single day. So continue to support, and if you have any leads about somebody who wants to join the Navy and Marine Corps, let me know, okay?
The Secretary of the Navy, Carlos Del Toro.
Thanks.
Thank you for doing this.
Thanks.